Hey up! Right, I made a video 7 months ago now about falling motorcycle prices, especially on the used market, because there were signs at the time that motorcycle sales were slowing down. And this trend is continuing. Now, this is of absolutely no surprise to me whatsoever. The reason for the gradual decline in motorcycle sales is exactly the same reason I gave you 7 months ago. Because the circumstances that caused it sort of last year are continuing, and not only that, they're getting worse. There were 2 articles published at the beginning of this year, one by Motorcycle News, which just gave the sort of bare facts of what was happening in the motorcycle industry. And then there was another one by Bennett's Bike Social a little bit later on, which just expanded on that a little bit further. And then about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I can't remember exactly when it was, I decided I was going to make this video as a follow-up to my original video from 7 months ago, which did quite well actually. And then that bloody Jeff from Jeff Buys Cars decided to stick his oar in, and he made a video about it, so I decided to leave it for a couple more weeks and let things calm down before me giving you my 10 pence worth. Before we get into that, please, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to this channel if you're not already a subscriber. 70 to 80% of the people that watch my videos are not subscribers, and to be honest, it would really help me out if they were, so anyway, I'll leave that up to you. I mean, I know motorcyclists are tight, but it's not like it costs you anything. Anyway, moving on. 7 months ago, I told you not to worry. In some ways, I think this is good for the likes of me and you. Now, one thing that I want to tackle first of all, especially regarding the Bike Social article, it sort of gives the impression, although it doesn't say it directly, and I'll leave a link in the video description for you to have a good look through it. It sort of gives the impression that motorcycling has been on the up forever and that this is like something to be really worried about. I don't think it is. The motorcycle industry itself still remains quite optimistic. They don't seem that worried about it because the motorcycle industry itself has always waxed and waned. It's never been constant. It's never been constantly climbing or, sitting on a plateau where they don't lose sales and they don't gain sales. It's an organic industry that, it has its highs and it has its lows. And granted, it looks like it's in a bit of a low at the moment, which may be set to continue for some time yet. But it will recover. Now, as I've said, I'll leave a link to both the MCIA article and the Bennett's Bike Social article in the video description down below. And to that end, I'm not going to read through them and give you a blow-by-blow account of what's said. I'm just going to give you my take on the situation and what we've got to look forward to. An attempt, if you like, to put it into some perspective. Now, for you, those of you that are old enough, cast your mind back to the early 1980s. I bought a few new motorcycles during the course of the 1980s, and of course at the beginning of the 80s, we had quite a major economic depression here in the UK. Money was scarce, credit was scarce, wages were low. There'd been a gradual decline in the late 1970s of motorcycle sales here in the UK, and then it really slumped when we hit the 1980s, or the early 1980s. And the main reason for that was the economic state of the country. Motorcycle finance has always been a high-risk business. I remember talking to a salesman when I was buying a bike, I think about 86, who told me that, getting finance companies to come on board with them to finance bikes for customers was really difficult because there was a much higher proportion of motorcyclists that didn't pay off their loans than there were for cars and other products. So those credit companies that were willing to finance the purchase of new motorcycles, understandably, charged pretty high interest rates compared to what they would charge a car dealership or anything else for that matter. And of course, by the 1980s, most people went to work in the cars. They didn't really need a motorcycle. It was a toy, for want of a better word. So the high cost of living, the scarcity of money, and the non-availability of affordable finance hit sales really hard. In fact, I think the first 3 motorcycles that I bought during the 1980s, I just got a bank loan for them because, motorcycle finance was extortionate. And we're pretty much in the same boat now. Now, the economic strife that we have at the moment occurred for different reasons. Back in early 2020, a certain virus spread all around the world. Our governments scared us all to death about it, sort of awarded themselves some new powers, and then made everybody stay at home on and off for the best part of 18 months. And then to make matters worse, they gave everybody free money that the government actually didn't have to persuade them to stay at home and not do any work. Now, during the lockdowns, of course, nobody could spend all this money that they were getting because they couldn't go anywhere to spend it. Petrol was for nothing because no one was travelling anywhere. I think at one point it hit 90 pence per litre. That had a knock-on effect with groceries, etc., where, freight costs came down. It was a pretty cheap period to live in. So there was a lot of surplus cash swashing about in people's bank accounts. Now, the upshot of this, of course, was that industry and business was on its knees. A lot of companies actually closed down and never reopened because there were no punters walking through the door. So everybody sitting at home on the internet with extra money in the bank accounts started buying motorcycles, and there was a significant peak in motorcycle sales going up through 2020, 2021 and well into 2022. Now, this was worldwide, not just in the UK, with manufacturers sort of reporting record sales. But this kind of behaviour on the part of any government giving away free money that you don't have always has consequences. Your tax revenue is severely compromised because nobody's working. Revenue from fuel duty is severely compromised because no one's buying fuel and no one's travelling anywhere. And the only way, really, that you can give away free money that you don't have is just to print more money, which obviously debases your currency and causes inflation. And because your lockdown agenda has caused a lot of businesses to close down or go bust, the economy's ability to, produce its way out of it is severely compromised. This was on the cards in the middle of 2020. It was obvious this was going to happen. By the beginning of 2023, we were sliding into a recession and the cost of living was going through the ceiling. Your average weekly grocery bill has increased by something like 25 to 30%. Petrol's gone up by about 40 or 50%. Interest rates, which have been at their lowest point for about the last 20 years, have suddenly skyrocketed. So people with mortgages that were only affordable because of those previous low interest rates are now struggling. And your average working person has virtually no or very little disposable income to splash out on things like motorcycles, because they're not essential and they can't justify buying them. Now, Bennett's Bike Social seemed to put the blame on the shoulders of Liz Truss for her mini-budget, early last year? And I'm no fan of Liz Truss, but really that policy wasn't given a chance. The damage was already done, it was already manifesting itself in society. She didn't cause it, but when she proposed a bitter pill to help sort the problem that we were in out, it was bad news that no one wanted to hear, so they kicked her out. I mean, Bennett's were quite happy to put the blame on Liz Truss, but they never mentioned the possibility that spiralling motor insurance costs, I mean, man's gone up by about 25% last year, might be a contributing factor to falling motorcycle sales. I'll leave it up to you as to why they might have left that out. Now, the sales statistics for motorcycles for the beginning of 2024, the first quarter, shows a decline in sales of a further, I think it was 2.something percent, 2.8 or 2.9%. The exact figure doesn't really matter. It shows a slight decline. It's not an equal decline among all sort of classes of motorcycle. Some classes have seen a slight increase in sales. It's the lower end of the market that seems to have been affected the most, whereas the luxury end of the market has actually increased sales slightly. And this is quite a normal phenomenon during times of sort of economic hardship. And it doesn't just affect the motorcycle industry, it affects all industries really, or all markets. In the middle of last year, I spoke to one or two jewellers. You know, I've got a bit of a thing about watches, and I was talking about how sales were going, because it seemed very quiet whenever I visited compared to the previous couple of years. Now, the sales of your entry-level watches, your Seikos, your Breitlings, your Tag Heuers, even your Tudors, had declined rapidly during the course of last year. I mean, these are the kind of watches that your average man in the street buys for a special occasion, maybe a 21st birthday present for the son or daughter, or, you know, for them, that special luxury purchase that they'll maybe only make once or twice in their lifetime. Sales for those type of watches have been decimated, and they're still in the toilet now, but sales for brands like Rolex, Panerai, and every brand above them, it's business as usual. Demand is still pretty much outstripping supply. And the reason for that is that the kind of people that buy those luxury products are not as badly affected by the cost of living crisis as everyone else. Either the filthy rich, so it doesn't matter, or, you know, the retired, the mortgage is paid off. It hasn't affected them in the same way. Yes, they've got a little bit less disposable cash than they're used to having, but they're still financially buoyant, and they can afford to splash out on these luxury items. Exactly the same phenomena is playing out with motorcycles, with brands like Norton, BMW, and of course we've got to mention Triumph, because the motorcycle press always praises Triumph's achievements, even though they're selling 20% less motorcycles than they did 20 years ago. And the reason for that is that these motorcycle brands have placed themselves in the premium luxury market, and by and large their customer base is not really interested in value for money. He's interested in the status that riding that brand will give him as perceived by other people. Don't shoot the messenger, that's how it is. And it's the same across all luxury markets. The Bentley marketplace, the Range Rover marketplace, Rolex and Vacheron Constantin marketplace, Norton and BMW, those markets always do well when there's an economic recession, because the type of customers that they normally attract are not affected by the consequences of inflation and recession, or at least not to the same degree as the rest of us. Where we've seen the biggest dip in sales on motorcycles is in the more affordable workaday motorcycle market, including our beloved modern classics. Now, again, Bennett's has mooted that perhaps our love affair with the modern classic is now on its way out. They might be right, and I have to say, over the last year, I've been keeping an eye on the viewing figures on other channels for certain modern classic reviews that have been carried out, and the views are nowhere near what I would normally expect them to be, so interest is definitely down. But what's the reason for that? Adventure tourer sales are on the up, slightly, and so are the sports bike category, a category that has been in freefall for well over a decade now. So there's clearly a change in trends. Now, just going back to modern classics, a lot of the more popular models here in the UK were sort of at the budget end or mid-range budget end of the motorcycle sort of sales categories. So, yes, they are going to be affected by this current trend and the sort of economic downturn. But the modern classic has a trick up its sleeve that no other model has. It's styled on a vehicle from 50 or 60 years ago. The one-upmanship of buying the latest, newest, all-singing, all-dancing model doesn't exist with the modern classic. So those people that already own a modern classic are less inclined to change them anyway. So certainly if they find that their finances are being squeezed somewhat, there's no advantage to going out and buying another one. So it's no hardship to hang on to it for another 1, 2 or even 3 years. Because when the economic situation gets better, and it will get better eventually, the models that will be available will be pretty much the same as the model that they've got now. That's just my take on it, but I think, you know, the modern classic is future-proof by virtue of what it is, quite simply. Money is scarce, so like with everything else, resale value is going to be lower than normal. I think quite possibly modern classic owners are just holding on to them for longer until the economic situation gets better. And as for YouTube views on those sort of reviews, if you're not in the market for a bike like that because you know you can't afford it, why torment yourself watching reviews? Now, there's one other thing which is a major killer of motorcycle sales here in the UK. And in the context of the fall in sales that we're witnessing now, it can't be ignored. The weather. I've had countless conversations with motorcycle dealers over the year who complain when we have a cold, wet riding season because it is a major sales killer. And let's face it, we're just coming into May and the weather is only just starting to pick up. The same happened last year, although I think it's safe to say that this year's been worse than last year. It has done nothing but rain since the beginning of April. And to make matters worse, it's been freezing cold. Now, if you're in the market for a car, even if it's a sporty little two-seater, the chances are it's going to have some kind of roof and it'll have a heater. So that doesn't really affect your decision as to when and where you go and buy one. Over the years, I've picked up a couple of motorcycles in bad weather, and it is a miserable experience. You know, you pick up your clean, bright, shiny piece of two-wheeled pride and joy, and by the time you get it home, it's covered in crud and you're soaked through to the skin. When the weather is bad, when you get a cold, wet start to a motorcycle season, people hold off, and they will continue to hold off until the weather improves. Add this to the current economic sort of issues that most people are facing, and yeah, of course, it's going to have an effect on motorcycle sales. For most of us, they're not an essential piece of transport. They're a luxury that most of us can only just afford at the best of times, so under the current situation, it's obvious that motorcycle sales are going to drop. But, you know, the silver lining to that, I suppose, is if you are in a position still to get one, there are better deals to be had out there. But one thing is for certain, it will get better for all of us. I mean, I was just thinking back to the 1980s when I first started riding. I could spend an entire week going to and from work, and I would never see another motorcycle on the road. I could go for a 2-week sort of touring holiday around Scotland, and I might see 3 or 4 bikes in the whole 2 weeks. We're nowhere near that point at the moment. it's not all doom and gloom. Things will get better for all of us. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. You can support me in other ways if you want to, via my Patreon page or via the super thanks button down below. Either way is much appreciated. I am of course going to be back next week, so until then please ride safely and I'll see you soon.